Hey, hello. Welcome to another Speed Secrets podcast. Today's guest is Mark Boudreau, who is CEO and publisher at Motorsport Prospects. Welcome, Mark. Thanks for being here on the show.
Thanks for having me, Ross. It's quite an honor.
I don't know about that, but we were just talking before we got going, and the only thing that we know for sure out of this thing is we're going to have some fun, and we'll probably run out of time. I just stole that from you, so. Hey, tell listeners about Motorsport Prospects. I know my experience with it, but just fill listeners in on I guess what you do with Motorsport Prospects.
Sure. Basically, I've been a racing fan since the very early 80s, and never actually wanted to race myself necessarily, but I was always fascinated with the business of racing. And as time went by, I used to keep track of a lot of the North American racers that were plying their trade in Europe in the pre-internet days, which made it very difficult.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated on how, at first it was always Formula One. Then I remember reading about Formula 3, and then I was fascinated in how these drivers kind of progress up that ladder. I was very familiar with hockey, being a Canadian, and playing hockey for all these years. I knew the path in hockey, but I didn't really know how the path worked out in racing. So me being myself, I started diving in and researching, and then as the internet came around, made things a lot easier. And what I noticed was, and I go to a lot of races, and I talk to a lot of parents of young drivers, and I noticed there was no real kind of central source for information on not just teams and racing series, but on services. For example, driver coaches, physical and mental conditioning coaches, young driver programs, scholarship programs, all the different things that could maybe make their life a little bit easier as far as progressing up, their motorsport ladder. There wasn't any kind of source for that. So I started putting together a database, almost more for my own kind of information. And then finally, I'm a little bit of a nerd, I suppose. So I decided to put it online. And as I talked to parents again, a lot of them were surprised that there was that much information, that there were that many sources of resources out there that they weren't aware of. So, for example, Speed Secrets is a perfect example. They might not have been aware of all the services that you offer. They might not have been aware of, physical conditioning coaches that specialize in motorsport. The whole thing about mental conditioning is something that they might not have thought about. And then on top of that, I also feature teams, racing teams globally, racing series globally. So they have a kind of an idea of who's racing, who to contact, where they're racing, and to put it in a system where they can easily find information. So if a driver is looking at what their options are out of karting, they're in North America, well, they will be able to see what series are out there, what the rough idea of a budget would be, and where they can go from there. So that's kind of how it all progressed. And that's kind of where I'm at now. It's still a work in progress. As you know, there's a ton of racing teams. There's a ton of series. It changes every year. But that's essentially the idea. When somebody asks me kind of what I'm doing, I say, essentially, I'm trying to be like the high school guidance counselor that you had when you were going to school. And when you said, I want to be a race car driver, and then they say, okay, well, here's what you got to look into. Here are the different paths you can take. And from there, it's up to you.
Well, it's, as you're sitting there saying that, I'm thinking that there is a ton of resources out there. But people got to go searching for them all over the place, and like you said, you're almost like the clearinghouse for it in a way. Yeah. But I can make the argument that but how many people know about Motorsport Prospects? So right now, how do people find Motorsport Prospects?
Okay, you can go motorsportprospects.com is the main site.
Yeah.
There's a Facebook group, Motorsport Prospects, on Twitter, LinkedIn. And that's something that I'm actually building out as, COVID has given me an opportunity to kind of sit back and figure out the kind of the nitty gritty of getting the word out there. So aside from being on podcasts like Speed Secrets, I'm working with, the fun stuff like SEO, getting, so that I can build the reputation and the visibility of the site. I think if you do search for motorsport resources, I might be second or third on your Google search. But yeah, that is the challenge, is getting, I've been networking essentially for the last year strictly to get the word out. And, it's starting to build up. I mean, there's definitely some traction. And word of mouth, people find out about this. I've worked with a couple of young drivers, and through that, things are building up. So the interesting part of it, and one of the things I'm planning on doing is what I didn't consider was that some people had actually suggested to me that they didn't have the time to actually go through the directory and do a lot of the research that they wanted to do. And so they essentially asked me if I could do the research. Now, I'm an ex-lawyer. I'm familiar with research, and I wasn't expecting that. So COVID kind of threw a bit of a monkey wrench into the plans, but there will be a kind of a corresponding consulting service that will be offered, so that essentially, if you, for whatever reason, don't have the time to do research and you're looking into, for example, what are the options out of karting in Australia, well, I can put together something for you that'll give you the exact options that you have, the resources you should check into, the budgets you need to be looking at, and all in a package. And then what's left is up to you. But building the name for the site has been kind of the challenge going forward, and that's basically what I've been working on.
And it's our sport really is kind of, it's not very user friendly in some ways, right? You go and play hockey or baseball or whatever, there's that ladder system. And our sport it's the ladder has like one step here, and then the other step is like way over there, and then there's another step that's way over there, and it's not a continuous kind of a deal, right?
Right. Yeah, and I mean, it's a lot of word of mouth, and let's be honest, it's also there are a lot of financial implications, right? A racing team is a business, and people essentially want at least some kind of a neutral, independent source of information on it, so that, because look, let's be honest, you'll go to pretty much any racing team, and they're not going to discourage you from signing up. They obviously want you. They want they want the budget, which is perfectly understandable. But for a lot of, especially younger drivers, they might not be quite sure if this makes sense. Is this budget realistic? What does it involve? So that's a little bit of what I dive into as well. It's very similar to when you're researching a university for your kids. It's a lot of money, and you want to make an informed decision, and that's essentially what I'm trying to do is enable you to make that informed decision.
And the sad thing is that there are teams who will tell, especially the parents of young drivers, oh, your son or daughter is, he or she, they're special. Mm-hmm. And really what's special is the parents have got some money. And the team just looks at that and kind of goes, they'll tell people what they want to hear. And unfortunately that leads to some less than favorable situations. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it just doesn't apply to young drivers. Gentlemen drivers, and that's something I'd never really thought about. But gentlemen drivers as well are bringing, these are successful business people for the most part. They're bringing a fair chunk of money, and everybody wants access to that money, and sometimes they might be very successful in their business lives, but maybe less aware of what's going on in motorsport. They're passionate about it, something they want to do. So they might not have enough neutral, independent information to make the right decisions. They too, need a bit of guidance, or at least a bit of independent guidance. It's up to them to make their decision. But I mean, everybody's going to tell you what you want to hear, and sometimes it's important, especially in motorsport, that you understand the realities as well as the opportunities.
I can't tell you the number of gentlemen drivers who have that I've seen that have gotten into the sport who just get taken advantage of, and it makes me sick. Sometimes when I'm coaching those gentlemen drivers, I feel like part of my job is to protect them, and it sounds like that's a lot of what you're doing there. But what about the drivers who don't want to go pro racing, resource wise? I think some of the stuff that you've got on your site in terms of, I don't care who you are. If you can go to the gym, you can go running, you can do all that stuff on your own, but having a trainer that is knowledgeable in motorsport can make such a big difference. And I know you've got links to different trainers and people like that as well. So
no, absolutely. I mean, regardless of what you want to do in motorsport, I mean, everybody who competes in any sport wants to obviously compete at the highest level they can. So if you're a club racer, you want to be the absolute best racer on the track that you can. So you want to maximize your potential as much as possible. You want to get your best bang for your buck. So for sure, there are resources out there, regardless of the fact that you don't want to be a pro, that you might want to look into. For example, when you talk physical conditioning, there are coaches that do distance training. They can do things online. They can set up a program for you that you can then take to your gym and implement. All those things. Sponsorship. The whole issue of sponsorship. If you're a club racer, you would still like to if possible, lower the amount of money that you have to invest. So perhaps you want to look into getting sponsorships involved. Well, there are all kinds of resources and programs and books that you can use to help you with that. So I think regardless of where you want to be and where you want to go, at the end of the day, you want to compete. You want to compete at the highest level you can, and you're looking for any advantage you can to help you increase your potential. And the site really does have pretty much anything related to motorsport. As long as you're racing, there are resources out there that you can definitely take advantage of.
One of the things that I find super fascinating is just why people get involved in our sport. And so I'm curious, why? Like, what is it for you that I guess got you involved in the sport back, you said in the 80s? What got you involved, and then why are you doing what you're doing today?
Well, I think, and you'll attest to this, anybody who gets bitten by the motorsport bug, I'm not going to say it's an addiction, but it's a hard thing to shake.
Yeah.
And, for me, it was, like a lot of Canadians, Gilles Villeneuve. Yeah. And then I saw I saw this guy race, and I didn't know anything about the sport. And I just, it was exotic. It was fast. It was exciting. And all those things it was just unlike anything I had ever experienced. And so, you just kind of fall down that rabbit hole. I mean, really, when you think motorsport in a way is the craziest thing to get involved in. It costs a fortune. There's no guarantee that you could ever become, a professional, let alone, a regular podium finisher, regardless of what you're doing. And yet we still do it. There's something about it that just, forget the pun, but drives us to want to keep getting involved. And for me, it was the business side of it. I always found the business side fascinating. The fact that it's a global sport, that is really kind of what drove me. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And that, and the fact that I just found that, I had I met a lot of people that were very passionate about the sport, but maybe not as aware as they should be as what was happening or what's involved. And so then I figured, it doesn't cost me anything to help, to give them a bit of basic information that'll help them, guide them to make whatever decisions they need to make. So that's why I did it. But I mean, maybe it is an addiction. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I don't know too many people that have gotten involved in motorsport and then basically after a few years said, "Oh, that's it. I'm not a fan anymore." Regardless, I mean, you see people complaining constantly about F1 and it's boring. It's the same guys winning, and yet we all tune in on Sunday mornings, just like every Sunday morning, to watch the races. It's something compelling about it. It's the human element combined with the technical part of it that just there's no other sport like it. So, that's kind of a long explanation for why I'm still, to this day, I still wake up, and it's not just F1. I mean, I watch a race, the beginning of a race, I still have that tingle that I've had since the very, very beginning. And I know I'm not the only one.
Well, and we could spend the next 4 hours just talking about Gilles Villeneuve stories. And, if somebody's listening to this podcast and they don't know Gilles Villeneuve, please, please, please go on YouTube Gilles Villeneuve and just watch some of the, man, there was a guy who inspired people to do the unthinkable. And, I think about the Canadian Grand Prix. I think that was 1980, wasn't it? When the front wing was knocked off in the car, and in the pouring rain, he's driving around with a wing underneath the front tire, and like never give up kind of a guy. That's who he was, and just amazing. So, yeah, I mean, if you think about Canadians who have been in motorsport, so many of them were inspired by Villeneuve, and he's certainly had an impact on my life. So, and one of the things that we've talked about is just how difficult the sport is. And yet, and I've said this before in this podcast, in some ways, this sport is more accessible, though, than other sports. Like, if I play tennis, I can't go and play at center court at Wimbledon. If I play football, I can't go play it in the stadium of my favorite football team, but I can go and drive at COTA.
Right.
We're F1. I can go and drive Mid-Ohio where IndyCar races. I can drive at Sebring where the sports cars race. I can do all those things. Anybody can. Mm-hmm. And so on one hand, it's disjointed in that ladder. It's difficult. It's difficult to find all that stuff. And yet, on the other hand, it's more accessible. And maybe that's why resources like yours are just so important.
Well, that's a really good point, because you don't need, that there are other options, and one of the things I always tell people is just be flexible. Be flexible and be open to any and every opportunity you get. Don't be so narrow focused on, for example, single seaters. Make sure that you're open to options like sports cars, touring cars, stock cars, whatever it may be. And if you love racing, there are opportunities to race. There's that champ cars, and there's a lot of series, even MX5, Global MX5, stuff like that, which is very accessible. I mean, it's still expensive. Let's not kid ourselves. But relatively speaking, you can race in places like Mid-Ohio and COTA and I mean, look, there's a series here in Canada, the Nissan.
The Micro Cup.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They're going to be racing. They were supposed to race the Canadian Grand Prix this year. They'll be racing there next year. That is, I think the budget for that is about $22,000 Canadian. That's including the car and everything but your helmet and your driving shoes.
Bizarre.
So, and you race at Mont Tremblant. You race at, I think they race at Mosport or Canadian Tire Motorsport Park. You race at the Grand Prix. You race at some of these great tracks. The competition is great. There's a lot of cars. And it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. And let's be honest, you behind the wheel dicing it with 30 other cars, it feels just like racing Le Mans. I mean, really, it's racing. And so yeah, there's plenty of opportunities, and I think a lot of people are not aware just because they might be focused on, for example, IMSA, and well, how would I afford to race in that? Well, you don't have to. You're looking too high. There are other opportunities that you can take, and then some people are perfectly fine to race just in that Micra Cup, and others, it's an opportunity to then build up their experience and then start looking at a higher level. So that's all part of it, and it's just the visibility. You just might not be aware of it. So yeah, that's part of what Motorsport Prospects is all about. The more people racing, the better. And I try to give as much visibility. I'll treat the Micra Cup just as important as I'll treat an LMP2 cars. It's to me, it's racing, and it's just what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? How much do you have? And then let's make it happen.
Yeah, and I could take that to another level. I don't know if level's the right word there, but autocross, rallycross, track days. Like you mentioned the budget endurance series, like Champ Car and WRL and stuff like that. But karting and karting can be pretty serious, and people are spending a lot of money there. But the indoor karting leagues, it's fantastic experience, and it's fun, and it's all those things that it feeds our addiction, right?
That's a really good point, and it's funny because I have not really on the site, the directory, I have not gotten involved too much in karting. Karting's a little bit of a wild west.
Yeah.
But you know what? That's a really good point. Indoor karting leagues. That will definitely feed your need for speed, and it won't break the bank. So that's a really good point, and it's probably something I should look into a little bit more. But yeah, essentially, if you want to, if it's something that you want to do, at the end of the day, you'll find a way to do it. Yeah. And there are options out there. It's not all multi-million-dollar budgets. There is a place for everybody, and you're right. I mean, that's the cool thing. You can race the same tracks where some of your favorite IndyCar and sports car and F1 drivers have raced. You can get the opportunity to race at those places. You just might not be aware of that there are those opportunities out there.
And yeah, so I guess that that gets to that accessibility point of view, or point that there is something for everybody out there. You just need to look around for it. But I'm going to throw something at you so Jeff Brown, great race engineer and one of my best friends in motorsport, and we've talked a lot about, and his advice was, and I think his father gave him this advice, was race, or whether even if you're not racing, you're doing track days, non-competitive type events, but go and participate or race where you have the biggest budget. And if you have if you have $1,000 to spend, maybe you're better off doing indoor karting league or race RC cars or something like that. If you've got, if you sit back and you go, okay, I could spend $3,000, think about where is that going to be? Where are you going to be the biggest budget person? And, and obviously that is if you are competitive and you want to be, the best in that area. If you're doing track days where, again, it's a non-competitive environment, you want the social part of it, then okay. But still look at, because I see people who look at it and they go, well, I've got $2,000 I can spend this year. I am going to go race Micro Cup. That's going to cost me $22,000. I'm only $20,000 short. Well, right. It's all you're going to do is get frustrated.
Right. No, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, race to what you can afford, and enjoy it. And I think actually that's an excellent point. In that a lot of people again are not aware. They might think that when we say that Micro Cup is a great deal, it's a great deal if you have $22,000, but it's not the only deal out there. And it's something to if you really want to do it, there are ways to do it. There are opportunities. There's a great website out there called I think it's called No Budget Motorsport. And that's really what he's looking, he focuses on is the achievable, the affordable, just to get you out on a track. And, so if that's, do what you can. It's better to be out on the track racing on, an indoor kart league than sitting on the sidelines wishing you could race, but you can't afford to race, a USF 2000.
Yeah.
Do what you can, race what you can afford. At the end of the day, you're on a track.
So what are the, maybe we're kind of touching on some of this, but what are some of the most common errors that you see drivers making?
Some of the biggest ones are one of the biggest ones is underestimating their budget. You see a lot, if you follow, for example, the Road to Indy, you watch the first race, which is usually St. Petersburg, and you'll see, let's just say 25 cars on the track. Often you'll see a driver that is mid to the back of the pack involved in an accident, and you will not see that driver for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Because they've completely underestimated the impact that, for example, an accident would cause on their budget. They're so tight on their money that those are the things that they just didn't consider. It's kind of like this would be a perfect scenario, assuming I will never get into an accident. That is one of the biggest. That's one of the biggest errors. And it goes to what you were just saying with your friend about racing to your budget. You have to be realistic, and you have to understand that. Let's just say an F2000 car looks like a little Indy car or a Formula One car. Maybe an F1600 car doesn't look as sexy, but for the budget that you have, it makes a lot more sense, for example, to race F1600, to learn your craft, to, the cars are more forgiving in that crash damage is less expensive. Those are the kind of things that a lot of people, because they get seduced by the sexiness of the sport. They see these cars and they're like, wow, they see these F4 cars and it looks like a little Formula One car. But they don't often have anybody telling them, yeah, but how much money do you have? And, this will only get you so far, and it really won't help you to where you want to go. So that, I think, is one of the biggest ones is not properly budgeting. And the other one is accepting everything for face value. You go see the first team and they tell you, this, that, and the other thing. And for X amount of dollars, you're on the team and this, and they just accept it. And they sign on without any real thought process going into it. And that's a big mistake. You have to do your research. And that's really why I started Motorsport Prospects. You need to research teams. Teams are built by people. It's all about relationships. You want to make sure that you have a proper relationship with the team owner, with the engineers. You want to make sure that the people that were there the year before when that team won the championship are still there the following year. So you need to research. You need to find out what are the options, who's out there, how do you interact with them, and what are you getting for your money, which goes to the budget issue. So those are, I think, the two biggest issues, I guess, are not budgeting properly, underestimating your budget, and just accepting everything for face value and not asking questions. And let's be honest, it can be intimidating. If you're a young driver, even if you're a gentleman driver with no real experience in motorsport, and you have somebody that runs, a Porsche GT3 car, and they're obviously successful, they've been around for a long time, your gut reaction is just to accept whatever they tell you. But that might not necessarily be in your best interest. It might be in the team's best interest, but not necessarily in yours. So you have to ask a lot of sometimes uncomfortable questions, but you do. So, and that's one of the reasons why, on Motorsport Prospects, I have a blog, and we talk about a lot of these things that you should be thinking about. For example, I just did an article on motorsport insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to think about that. It's not a very exciting thing, but it's so necessary to understand how this could impact your motorsport career. And so I talked to two, brokers that are specialists in motorsport insurance, and we talked about the kind of the 8 things that you need to look at. And a lot of people underestimate that, or they don't even think about it. And then one day there's a sad realization that their whole budget is done because of one accident or whatever. So that's really you need to research. It's not fun, but at the end of the day, this regardless of whether you're spending $1,000 or $100,000, it's still money. It's still a lot of money. You want to get the best bang for your buck. So it makes sense to research this and really make sure that you're, at the very least, you're making an informed decision. Whatever that decision is, it's completely up to you. But you're informed in what you're doing.
And I think the biggest challenge for a lot of people is they don't know what questions to ask. So hopefully they're going to read your blog and they're going to get a lot of ideas of what questions to ask. But a common mistake, exactly as an example of that I see, is a driver say, well, I talked to team A and their budget is whatever, $100,000, $10,000, whatever it is. Their budget is, we'll say it's $100,000. And I've talked to this other team and they want $125,000. So I'm going to go with the team that's team A that is for $100,000. And you go, but what do you get for that? The car's going to show up. What about the team that's charging $125,000? Well, I get the tires, I get the entry fees, I get, and it's at the end of the day, the team that's charging $125,000 is actually less expensive than the one that's charging $100,000.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the easiest things to do that, strangely enough, a lot of people don't do is talk to some of the ex-drivers of the teams.
Yeah.
Find out what their experience was with the team. Look, I mean, any team, in my opinion, worth its salt will have no problems if you're not aware of who their previous drivers are. They'll tell you. I mean, you can find that information usually on their website, but they will tell you, and they'll say, go and speak to them. Go and speak to them, and they'll tell you exactly what kind of service and support that they got from our team structure. That's doesn't cost you anything, but it's a great way to get an idea of, what the difference is between that $25,000 difference in the cost. What does that involve? And again, it's personal relationships. So, that $100,000 budgeted team, who knows, maybe the people involved are, you don't click with them. And if you don't click with them, it's not going to work, and that, Ross, we've talked about that when you did an interview on the blog, and you were very much, that was one of your main points, was it is the personal relationship. It's the trust that you have between, team owner, engineer and driver, coach and driver. That is something that is fundamental to any possibility of success. And if there is no trust, and if there's not the proper level of support, it doesn't matter what you spend. It's not going to work out in the end.
Yeah. And I think you've kind of already answered this question, but I'm curious, your background as a lawyer, how has that impacted the way you look at motorsport and just these resources and going through this process?
Well, one of the main things is the curse of law school is that you tend to become the devil's advocate. So if you have 10 people all agreeing on something, you tend to be the one person that says, yeah, but what about this? And that can be annoying in a social situation, but it can be very helpful when you're trying to do some research, when you're trying to get ideas and answers onto what the best way forward is. So, that's what I tend to do. I tend to bring up the questions you don't want to ask. I tend to, deal with the uncomfortable realities of a situation, and just so that you're fully aware of what's going on. For example, you have, there are situations in a team where, one person is paying X amount of dollars, the other one is paying it might be paying considerably more. Unfortunately, the one paying considerably more is essentially doing that in order to subsidize the one who's paying less, but who has possibly more potential. So you're basically subsidizing the other driver. Those are the kind of things that nobody would really think about until you ask the question, and often they don't know to ask that question. Those are the kind of things that in law, that's what you have to do, right? You have to ask all those questions and cover every basis that you can in order for you to make the right decision going forward. And that's essentially what I do. And I'll be honest with you, that's probably, as much as people tend to hate lawyers, they always love them when they need them. And that is the one thing where a lot of times the feedback I get when I get involved in just kind of discussing things with people and giving them some options, is that they know that I'm thorough. I cover all the bases, or certainly as much as I can reasonably cover, and and they appreciate that. And sometimes the answer is maybe not necessarily what you want to hear, but at least you have an informed. You can make an informed decision. Maybe Team X is not really the right fit for your daughter for this reason than that reason. Team Y might be a bit of a better fit for this reason and that reason. Now it's up to you. You can't say that you didn't know the differences between the two, but again, it's strictly up to you to make that decision. So that's really what my law training essentially brings to the table. Is I tend to, when somebody says, it's, we're going to do this, the budget is this, and, I guarantee this, that, and the other thing. Well, usually my pushback is, what does that involve? How can you guarantee that? Based on your past, how could this work out? And, and then we leave it at that. So really that's what law has done for me. And like I said, it could be a curse because you tend to always look for a gap. You're looking for a potential issue that might come up. And I mean, and a perfect example is I did an interview last summer with a lawyer that specializes in motorsport law, and and there were a lot of questions there that, she goes into detail about the things that you need to know or at least ask before signing, for example, any kind of a contract. Yeah. There are things that people, I'm not going to say regular people, I suppose, wouldn't think about. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that's what lawyers are paid to think about. So you can at least know that there's an informed decision there. So, and I love research, so I don't mind getting involved in getting all those details. And like I said, the directory is a never-ending. It'll never be over because things change all the time.
Yeah.
Teams change, people in the teams change, and that's a big one. That's the one that a lot of people don't necessarily understand, is that Team X might have won the championship last year, but the driver coach that essentially, and the engineer that ensured that driver won the championship, they might not be with that team the following year. So those are those little things that a lot of people are not aware, and that's what I try to become aware of for myself.
Interesting, as you were describing that and the devil's advocate, I'm kind of going, yeah, that's my job as a coach.
Yeah.
My job is to kind of go, well, what if you took that corner, you entered that corner 3 miles an hour faster? Or why are you lifting for that fast corner? And trying to dig into, a lot of times the driver will go, I don't really want to talk about that because, I don't want to say that I'm afraid. But part of the coach's job is to dig into that and try to figure out, is it a fear thing? Is it and then, what is the driver afraid of? Is it the front end's going to wash off the track, or the rear end's going to snap around? Okay, well, maybe that's something the engineer can help with by changing the setup on the car. But in the end, as you're saying that, I'm like, yeah, that's a coach's job as well. It's to dig into some of the things that maybe a driver would gloss over or not want to deal with.
Right, absolutely, and you're a perfect example of offering it's constructive criticism. It's
Yeah.
not criticism for the sake of you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. It's you shouldn't do this because of this reason. What you should be doing is that. I mean, that's the difference between a good coach and a bad coach.
Yeah.
Giving advice on what team to race for. It's not saying this team is bad and this team is good. Is these are the pros and cons of that team. These are the pros and cons of that team. Now it's your job to weigh those and make a decision. But sometimes you have to. The sport is a very, I use the term sexy, and it's kind of the best term I could think of, but it is, and it's a very seductive sport.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to get caught up in the glamour of the whole environment. But at the end of the day, there's not only is there dollars on the line, but let's be honest, it's a dangerous sport.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you are not only getting the best bang for your buck, but you are getting the best advice that's in your interest, both as a driver and as a person, as in that you're going to be given safe and the right advice, so that you are not going to make decisions on the track which will end up that could end up not only scrapping your car, but that could seriously hurt you. So there should be no fear of receiving or giving constructive criticism. That's part of growth, right? I mean, you learn by that stuff, and I don't think anybody is successful by just having somebody tell them what they want to hear. I think everybody, in order to be successful, you need to hear sometimes things that you don't want to hear, and that's what a good coach is about. That's what a lawyer does, and that's what I hope to do in what I'm doing. I'm not there to recommend driver coaches, but I'm certainly there to, say here are some highly respected coaches, and here's the pros and cons of these coaches, and now it's up to you to make your decision.
If you could wave your magic wand, because I know you have one, because everybody in motorsport has a magic wand, right? If you could wave your magic wand, what is the one thing that you would do for the sport?
The one thing I would is I think I would just try to get it so that people manage their expectations. I think it's important that, it drives me crazy sometimes when people are either, there's always the extremes. And I've always said, and the biggest extreme is always, racing costs a fortune. It's too expensive. Well, you have to manage your expectations. And, the advice that Jeff gave is a perfect example. Yeah, it's expensive, but if you manage your expectations, you can still compete. You can still compete and be part of the sport. And in a lot of sense, in a sense, that's really what Motorsport Prospects is all about.
Yeah.
It's helping you manage your expectations. It's not discouraging you. It's being realistic. I would never discourage somebody from pursuing their dreams. That is what life is all about. And all I'm trying to do is make sure that you're aware of the realities, giving you as many resources that you can possibly have to help you, achieve those dreams, but also at the same time, making sure that you understand that, it's not an easy ride, but if you really want to do it, it's possible, and anything's possible. And if you really want to race cars, if you really truly want to race cars, you will be able to do it. You just have to find the right path for you. And everybody has a different path, that we all have different expectations. But if you want to be racing on a track, it's doable. I think at the end of the day. So really what Motorsport Prospects is all about, and I guess what I'm trying to get out there is, I want as many people involved in the sport as possible. And so in order for that to happen, I want to make sure that they have access to as many resources as possible that'll enable them to make that happen. Really, I think that would be my contribution. And I mean, I look at, you look at things like disabled people that are racing. I mean, if somebody who's paralyzed from the waist down can race cars, I'm pretty sure that most of us, if we really want to, we can.
Yeah.
Because it is anything is possible, if you really want it to happen. And so I'm putting out the resources there to kind of help you make that decision to get to where you want to be.
It's interesting. I wrote an article a little while ago, kind of addressing the whole thing of, so I never had the budget, so I couldn't make it to the top of racing. If only I'd had more money. If only.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, look at the starting grid for the Indy 500 and go down the list of all the drivers and look at how many of them started with, huge amounts of family money. And, some people look at Formula One and go, Lance Stroll is there because family money, right? Got him there. He's an exception to the rule. And by the way, has done an amazing job. I'm not taking it, he's proven that he belongs there as well. But for every driver who got there because of all the money, there's at least 10 or 100 that got there without that money. So if you're thinking the only way you can make it in racing or any, to any level, you want to be the league champion in indoor karting, and you're thinking, yeah, but I can't go and practice as much as everybody else can. There are other ways. You just need to find it. So I think it's great advice.
I mean, there's a driver, Parker Thompson. He's from Red Deer, Alberta. Great driver. I mean, he hustles like you wouldn't believe. And I've chatted with him a couple of times, and one of the things he told me was, even if you're not racing, go to races, introduce yourself, network in the paddock. He literally got, I think last summer, pre-COVID, he was racing in like 4 different series. And a lot of that was just because he introduced himself to different people. And when a drive came up, it could have been a one-off. They knew about him. They had talked to him. They called him up. He had to get himself to the track. He raced, and then that kind of built up onto something else. Next thing you know, he's racing for a season. There are ways to do it. Regardless of what you want to do, you just have to ask yourself: do you really want to do it, or do you not?
Yeah.
And if you do, you have to put in the work. Every team manager I've ever talked to, when I talk to them, what is a recommendation that you would give to a young driver or any driver? And it's always put in the work.
Yeah.
You got to put in the work. It's not always fun, but that's life, right? Anything we really want to do, we need to put in the work.
Yeah.
So part of the work is researching. That's I'm kind of trying to give you a heads up or a push in that department, so that at least you can get that going.
So maybe you already have here, but what advice would you give listeners to help them be better drivers? So kind of your speed secret.
It is perseverance. Really, at the end of the day, it is perseverance in not giving up, in always improving, not assuming you know everything, because you never will. So it's persevering, it's constantly pushing, and it's let's be honest, it's not easy, but it's being able to accept criticism.
Yeah, good point.
I mean, you have to do that. At some point, you have to be willing to say, you know what, you're right. This is an opportunity for me to improve. I just need to make these changes. It's nothing personal. It is strictly, it's just constructive criticism.
Yeah. So Mark, Motorsport Prospects, it's motorsportprospects.com?
Yeah, motorsportprospects.com. I think it's also motorsportprospects.racing, .net, .org, all of them, but the .com is the main one. I mean, if you Google for Motorsport Prospects, you will get all the different links. I recommend, I'm starting a newsletter soon, because the blog is updated usually every second week with some pretty good stuff. I interview people like Ross Bentley. So, there's some pretty good sources of information, regardless of where you are in your motorsport journey. And I'm on, all the social media. So that's probably the best way to get involved. And Motorsport Prospects is growing. You will be able to essentially sign up as a member. It's free, and you can save different things to your account, the articles that interest you, the teams that you might be researching, things like that. So there's a lot of cool stuff coming up. So definitely jump in and by all means, let me know if there's anything that's missing or that you'd like to see changed or improved. And again, constructive criticism, I'm more than willing to implement it.
That is awesome, Mark. Thank you for giving to the sport. I appreciate it because you're bringing more people in and helping them stay in the sport longer. So that's all good, helping the sport all the way around. So thanks for doing that. Hey, one of these days we'll finally get back to a track and maybe we'll have another conversation when we're at the track.
Absolutely. That would be wonderful. I think we're all looking for some kind of normalcy in 2021 because this year has been more than a challenge.
Not normal. Let's just say not normal.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, Mark, again, thanks. And as always, keep learning, keep having fun.
Thanks, Ross.
If you're listening to Ross, reading one of his books, or watching a webinar, chances are you're a pretty fast driver, or even really fast. But you probably want more. You want to lower your lap times, or maybe even a little bit faster. But how? Ross's Drive Faster webinar has some answers. It will help you understand what to do, then give you a plan for doing it. Ross shares many of his proven strategies for making you a faster driver. This is an information-packed webinar that you can view, review, and rewind anytime, again and again. When a driver thinks he or she has set a personal best lap time, Ross usually says, "Remember, there's always more." Well, that's true with this 3-hour webinar that was recorded over 2 sessions. There's no better time than right now to learn skills and concepts and put together your plan for taking your driving to the next level. Go to speedsecrets.com/webinars to download the Drive Faster session and keep learning.